Hi everyone, Mimsy here. Today I'm going to talk to you about my epoxy countertops. I did these a few months ago, and I'm going to tell you 4 things that I would do differently if I could do this project over again, or if I did this over again. And I'm going to preface this by saying I absolutely love my countertops, and if I were to do these again and had to do them exactly the same, I would totally do it again over not doing them at all. So if you're thinking about doing an epoxy countertop, go for it. You will not regret it. It's not that hard. So I replaced my countertops with MDF. So this is pertaining to putting in your own MDF. I had to do that because I had IKEA butcher block that was different thicknesses, and I didn't even have a piece that went all the way into the corner. So I was missing a piece of countertop back there. So I put down my own MDF. So the number one thing that I would do differently if I were to do this again is I would double up my MDF. This is just one sheet of 3/4 MDF. And I would go ahead and do 2 sheets, glue them and screw them and put a double thickness on here because my counters are not completely level. So there's a couple spots where it's like a little bit, there's a bit of a dip. And you don't really notice it unless you're sitting here I sit here at my island and stare at my counters. So I notice it. Nobody else would really notice it unless they were really studying them. But I would do double thickness because I think that would probably level this out and make it a lot flatter and straighter than it is now. I would also, if I were to do that, double up the thickness of the MDF, I would stagger the joints of the MDF because that's one of the problems that I had with this is I have a joint line right here, and if you're looking at it in just the right light, you can see it. So, and I think that's because it flexed a little bit. Back there in the corner, and I'll give you a close-up of that, I have a spot where I kneeled on the countertop and one part of it wasn't secured or held back by a cleat back here. So it came down and you can really see that, and I'll show that to you here in a minute. So if you're going to do the double up on the MDF, make sure that you stagger your joints, put one joint here, and then on the top part put the joint over here so you don't get this settling. And I was really careful to use pocket hole screws on my joint and made sure that it was supported by the countertop underneath, but there's still a little bit of settling here, and it's only noticeable in a certain light, but I notice it. So that's what I would do different. Oh, the other thing about that is I would probably go ahead and put a piece of trim molding on the front, because the MDF, when you round this over, which you've got to round over your countertop, when you round it over, it's got a real rough edge. And now you could utilize wood filler on here and fill it and then sand it, and that would give you a smooth edge, but it would be easier just to go ahead and put a piece of trim molding on the front of the double MDF, and then you can route that over, and because it's real wood, not MDF, it would give you a nice smooth edge. So let me show you these joints real quick. Okay, so here's a view of the joint in my MDF, and it's going to be very difficult to see on camera, but you can kind of just barely see a little bit of a shadow right here. And so you can kind of only see it in certain light, but you can see it. So there's one, and then I'll show you the other one in the corner where I actually kneeled down. I'm going to leave it a little bit dark so that you can see the... Okay, so here's this one. This is going to focus this close, but you can see it right here. And this one's to the point where it almost cracked the epoxy. When I knelt on the countertop to get to the wall above it, it almost cracked the epoxy. Okay, and then the second thing I would have done different is just a simple design thing, and it's all kind of personal preference, and it's a silly little thing, but I would have probably done one longer vein that ran almost, just a longer distance. I kind of did all my veins at an angle from the front to the back, like that. And I ran them all in the same direction, because generally when you're looking at natural stone, the veins do all run in the same general direction. And I would have done one longer vein that was a longer stretch. So you see what I mean? I did kind of at an angle. And I love it, but I would have done that differently. So that's a small thing. Okay, and then one other thing as far as this front edge that I would have done differently. So number 3. So number 1 was the double up, the 2 is the make the longer vein, and this is the third thing I would have done differently, and that is I would have sanded this bottom edge off so that you have a little bit of a rounded front to this. I didn't realize that that would help the epoxy drop off of here rather than give me like a bead of epoxy that ended up on this front edge. So if you sand off this bottom edge, you won't get that little bead of epoxy that wants to pool up here on the edge. And I'm not talking about the drips underneath, because you have to go under and wipe those drips, but I'm talking about this little, there's a little bead of epoxy that accumulates right there at the edge if you don't round off that bottom. So I would do that too. Is when I was rounding over the top, I would have taken my sander or my planer and just rounded off this edge a bit. And then the last thing that I would have done differently, so I would put on another coat of epoxy after my backsplash was in and my top had the caulking back here. So I had to put a bead of caulking behind the countertop to fill the gap between the backsplash and the countertop. And this in some places is a little bit thicker than in some places because, like I said, my countertops did not come out completely level, so it gets thicker over there, and I touched on that in my other video. But I would go ahead and once the caulking is put in here, put another coat on top of this in order to basically seal up that caulk, because when things get on the caulk, like coffee and just other stuff, it does stain. So if I were to put another layer of epoxy over this, it would seal up that silicone caulk right there and just give me a nice thicker coat of epoxy. So those are the things I would do differently. If you have any questions about this, please leave them in the comments, and check out the video on prepping for epoxy. There's a lot of good information in there if you're thinking about doing epoxy countertops. So thanks for watching, you guys. Make sure that you like and subscribe and hit the bell notification so that you'll be notified when I do future videos. And stay tuned because I have more epoxy videos coming up. I just finished a large kitchen over laminate. It was a green laminate that I did similar to mine, and it's a huge transformation. There's a ton of tips and tricks on that one for going over laminate countertops. So stay tuned for that video. And I'm also going to do this island countertop. This is actually that concrete feather finish, and I'm going to epoxy this to make it look like natural soapstone, and I'm going to sand this so it'll have a matte finish like soapstone. So hit the bell notification so you'll be notified when those videos come out. Thanks you guys for watching. Bye.